They say the biggest wounds are inflicted not by strangers, but by the people who promise to protect you. I used to think that was a dramatic movie line until the night my own mother looked me in the eye and tried to sign away my future. It was New Year's Eve, not the chaotic, champagne-popping kind, but the solemn family mandatory dinner. The air in our dining room was thick with the scent of pine and roast beef, but underneath the festive cheer, there was always a low hum of tension. In our family, appearances weren't just important, they were everything. We lived in a bubble of supposed perfection, but that bubble had just burst over the head of my older sister Clara. Clara the golden child. The perfect student, the perfect wife to a successful corporate lawyer. She was the one who was supposed to uphold the family name, the one who never stumbled. But 3 weeks earlier, the unimaginable happened. Clara got divorced. And not just a quiet separation, but a messy public scandal that the local society columnists couldn't wait to sink their teeth into. My mother, Eleanor, had been frantic ever since, working herself into a fever trying to contain the damage. To her, Clara's failure wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a stain on the family legacy. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. The sensible one. I was 27, engaged to a wonderful man named Michael, and we were months away from closing on our first home. We had plans. Big, exciting plans that felt safe, secure, and entirely mine. We were the last hope for a respectable family future. Or so I thought. The dinner felt heavy. Clara sat across from me, looking pale and defensive. My father was silent, a nervous, flickering shadow in the corner. Then the moment came. The moment that changed the shape of my life forever. My mother cleared her throat. It was the sound of a judge about to deliver a severe sentence. She looked directly at me, her face hard, utterly devoid of the usual maternal warmth. "Sarah," she began. She used my full name, which was always a bad sign. "Clara's situation is unmanageable. The shame is widespread. She needs time to recover, and frankly, she needs to save face." I nodded slowly, wondering why this lecture was directed at me. I was preparing to offer some sympathetic platitude when she delivered the punchline. "Your sister is divorced now," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the walls might be listening. "So you'll be the one who will put your wedding on hold? The one who will let Clara move into your new house with Michael, giving her a fresh start? And the one who will eventually marry the man she was supposed to?" The world went silent. The crackle of the fireplace, the clink of silverware, it all disappeared. I felt a cold shock travel from my spine to my skull. My mother had just used my happiness as a bargaining chip to mend her favorite daughter's broken image. She wanted me to give up my home, my engagement, and potentially my own life path, just to protect the fragile honor of my sister. This wasn't concern. This was a calculated, devastating betrayal. It was the night everything broke. I wish I could tell you I stood up, yelled, and flipped the table, but the shock paralyzed me. I just stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity, the depth of the self-centered calculation in her eyes. It was a moment of stark clarity. My mother didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as a movable asset. Michael, sitting beside me, was the first to react. His jaw clenched, and his hand shot out to cover mine, a silent promise of defense. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously low, "with all due respect, what are you talking about? Sarah and I are buying that house. We are getting married. That is our future." My mother dismissed him with a flick of her wrist, as if he were a minor inconvenience. "Oh, Michael, please. You're a good man, but you're practical. You see the bigger picture. Clara needs a safe landing pad immediately. And frankly, Sarah, delaying your wedding for a year will only help you prepare better. It's a small sacrifice for the family. Clara's reputation affects us all. A small sacrifice?" She called the foundation of my life a small sacrifice. She wanted me to hand over the house Michael and I had spent a year saving for. She wanted me to delay the happiest day of my life. And the worst part? She truly believed this was reasonable. That was the most terrifying realization of all. I finally found my voice, though it came out choked and unsteady. Mom, what about my reputation? What about my life? Why does Clara's failure automatically translate into my required sacrifice? I didn't ask for this. Clara, who had been eerily quiet, suddenly chimed in, her voice dripping with wounded entitlement. It's easy for you, Sarah. You're the quiet one. The one who doesn't cause trouble. You can't afford to wait. I'm the one whose life is in pieces. The house would give me space to breathe and putting the wedding off. Well, it takes the focus off me for a while. Her words were like a physical blow. It wasn't just my mother's demand. It was my sister's expectation. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a complete transfer of my successful life trajectory to cover her own wreckage. The sting of betrayal from both of them was instant and agonizing. My father finally spoke, his eyes glued to his plate. Girls, please. Your mother has thought this through. We just need to manage the optics. The house is a minor issue. The important thing is keeping Clara's ex-husband, Robert, from talking to the press. If we show a strong united front, we can contain this. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the house or the wedding delay. This was a cover-up. The shame, the optics, the united front, it all pointed back to one thing, saving the family image, no matter the cost to me. No, I heard myself say, the word echoing loud and clear in the strained silence. No, you cannot steal my future to save Clara's honor. It's not a negotiable item. My mother's eyes narrowed. The loving mask vanished completely, revealing the cold, strategic person beneath. You will reconsider, Sarah. You owe this to your sister. And you owe this to the family. She stood up, her movement final and absolute. The house keys will be transferred to Clara by the end of the month. The wedding is postponed indefinitely. We will discuss this no further. But I knew this was far from over. This was only the beginning of the fight. And for the first time in my life, I realized that to survive my own family, I would have to become their enemy. I wish I could tell you I stood up, yelled, and flipped the table, but the shock paralyzed me. I just stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity, the depth of the self-centered calculation in her eyes. It was a moment of stark clarity. My mother didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as a movable asset. Michael, sitting beside me, was the first to react. His jaw clenched, and his hand shot out to cover mine, a silent promise of defense. Eleanor, he said, his voice dangerously low, with all due respect, what are you talking about? Sarah and I are buying that house. We are getting married. That is our future. My mother dismissed him with a flick of her wrist, as if he were a minor inconvenience. Oh, Michael, please. You're a good man, but you're practical. You see the bigger picture. Clara needs a safe landing pad immediately. And frankly, Sarah, delaying your wedding for a year will only help you prepare better. It's a small sacrifice for the family. Clara's reputation affects us all. A small sacrifice? She called the foundation of my life a small sacrifice. She wanted me to hand over the house Michael and I had spent a year saving for. She wanted me to delay the happiest day of my life. And the worst part? She truly believed this was reasonable. That was the most terrifying realization of all. I finally found my voice, though it came out choked and unsteady. Mom, what about my reputation? What about my life? Why does Clara's failure automatically translate into my required sacrifice? I didn't ask for this. Clara, who had been eerily quiet, suddenly chimed in, her voice dripping with wounded entitlement. It's easy for you, Sarah. You're the quiet one. The one who doesn't cause trouble. You can't afford to wait. I'm the one whose life is in pieces. The house would give me space to breathe and putting the wedding off. Well, it takes the focus off me for a while. Her words were like a physical blow. It wasn't just my mother's demand. It was my sister's expectation. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a complete transfer of my successful life trajectory to cover her own wreckage. The sting of betrayal from both of them was instant and agonizing. My father finally spoke, his eyes glued to his plate. "Girls, please. Your mother has thought this through. We just need to manage the optics. The house is a minor issue. The important thing is keeping Clara's ex-husband, Robert, from talking to the press. If we show a strong united front, we can contain this." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the house or the wedding delay. This was a cover-up. The shame, the optics, the united front, it all pointed back to one thing: saving the family image, no matter the cost to me. "No," I heard myself say, the word echoing loud and clear in the strained silence. "No, you cannot steal my future to save Clara's honor. It's not a negotiable item." My mother's eyes narrowed. The loving mask vanished completely, revealing the cold, strategic person beneath. "You will reconsider, Sarah. You owe this to your sister. And you owe this to the family." She stood up, her movement final and absolute. "The house keys will be transferred to Clara by the end of the month. The wedding is postponed indefinitely. We will discuss this no further." But I knew this was far from over. This was only the beginning of the fight. And for the first time in my life, I realized that to survive my own family, I would have to become their enemy. Over the next few days, the tension at home became unbearable. My mother didn't argue or plead. She simply assumed compliance. She started packing up some of Clara's things, discussing paint colors for my future kitchen, and talking to Michael's mother about the temporary wedding postponement. She was executing her plan as if I had already signed the surrender papers. But I hadn't. I spent hours talking with Michael. He was furious, ready to cut my mother off entirely, but I knew that would only escalate the situation into a nuclear family war. I had to find a different way, a strategic way. A way that didn't just protect my life but exposed the twisted, unfair foundation of their demands. I started observing Clara more closely. She wasn't acting like a heartbroken divorcee in need of refuge. She was restless, constantly on her phone, taking hushed calls outside. She had a strange, almost nervous excitement about her. The victim act didn't quite fit. One afternoon, I found Clara's discarded purse on the kitchen counter. I know I shouldn't have looked inside, but the desire to understand why she was so easily accepting this sacrifice from me was overwhelming. Deep in a side zipper, I found a small folded receipt. It was from a high-end jeweler in a city 3 hours away. The date was a week before her divorce papers were filed, and the purchase, a custom engagement ring. A man's ring. The blood rushed out of my head. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a planned escape. Clara wasn't mourning her failed marriage. She was celebrating her new engagement. My mother, the master of optics, must have been completely unaware, or was she? The thought chilled me. I looked at the receipt again. The price tag was astronomical. Who was the new man? And why the extreme secrecy? If Clara was truly happy and moving on, why did my mother feel the desperate need to steal my life to cover the old one? The answer became horrifyingly clear. The person Clara was marrying next had to be someone the family would utterly disapprove of. Someone who would bring far more shame than a simple divorce. My sister's honor wasn't being saved from a divorce. It was being saved from a second, far worse scandal. This small piece of paper changed everything. This wasn't a family dynamic I was dealing with, it was a conspiracy. My mother and Clara were willing to destroy my future because they had a much bigger secret to keep buried. And I had just found the shovel. I knew then that I couldn't just fight for my life. I had to expose the whole truth. Justice wasn't just about saving my wedding. It was about shining a light on their deep, unforgivable betrayal. The receipt for the engagement ring wasn't just proof of Clara's secrecy, it was the leverage I needed. It confirmed that the house, the delayed wedding, the entire monstrous demand, was nothing more than a smokescreen designed to distract the family and the local gossip machine from a far more damaging truth. My mother wasn't protecting Clara from failure. She was protecting her from a second, and possibly permanent, public disgrace. I decided to involve Michael. I couldn't carry this burden alone, and besides, he was a strategist. He was angry enough to fight, but calm enough to plan. That night, after my parents and Clara were asleep, Michael and I met at our empty yet to be purchased dream home, the one my mother was trying to steal. The irony was bitter. I showed him the receipt. He read the jeweler's name, the date, and the insane price tag. His initial anger melted into a cold, determined resolve. A custom man's ring, bought before the divorce was final, Michael muttered, pacing the hollow living room. This isn't just about a new boyfriend, Sarah. This is about who he is. Why else would Eleanor be so desperate to contain the current situation that she'd sacrifice us? We started connecting the dots. Clara's ex-husband, Robert, was part of a major old money family. Her marriage was a union of local dynasties. Any new spouse needed to meet or exceed that standard. But if Clara was getting a custom ring in secret, it meant the man was anything but suitable. We started with the most basic step, tracking the jeweler. Michael, leveraging his own discreet professional contacts, managed to get a name associated with the high-value transaction. It wasn't Clara's. It was the name of a business partner who Clara had often dismissed as a vulgar, self-made man with too much money and bad taste. Let's call him Mr. X, but the real shock came when Michael did a deep dive into Mr. X. He wasn't just a business partner. He was Clara's ex-husband's biggest, fiercest professional rival. The man who was actively working to buy out Robert's entire company and dissolve his career. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. Clara wasn't just divorcing Robert. She was marrying the man who was destroying him. This wasn't romance. This was high-stakes corporate and social warfare played out in the private sphere. If my mother, Eleanor, revealed that her shamed daughter was now marrying the man who was dismantling her previous husband's life and legacy, the family's social standing would be ruined permanently. They would be seen not just as victims of divorce, but as calculating, manipulative traitors. My mother hadn't been protecting Clara's honor. She was protecting the family's wealth and reputation from a complete public meltdown. And my future? That was just collateral damage. Understanding the scope of the betrayal didn't just hurt. It fueled me. I was no longer the quiet sister who would obediently step aside. I was a casualty of their war, and now I was ready to fight back, not with a shout, but with a strategic strike. I needed to ensure my life was saved, but also that my mother and sister understood the true, irreversible cost of their actions. My revenge plan had 3 core rules: legality, irrefutability, and public exposure. Rule 1. Legality. I couldn't break the law, or lose the moral high ground and destroy my own future. My weapon had to be the truth, delivered in a way they couldn't deny. Rule 2. Irrefutability. The evidence had to be concrete. The jeweler's receipt was a start, but I needed absolute proof of Clara's new engagement and the timing. Rule 3. Public exposure. If my mother was terrified of bad optics, then the only way to shut down her control was to seize control of the optics myself. I had to reveal their plot, not just to the family but to the people whose good opinion they valued most. Their social circle. Michael and I spent the next week quietly gathering the facts. We confirmed the relationship between Clara and Mr. X, finding photos they subtly posted on locked social media accounts during secret trips. We secured copies of the real estate closing documents for our house, which show my mother was attempting to insert herself as a co-signer, legally complicating the transaction to make it easy for her to transfer the deed to Clara. The most crucial piece of information, however, came from my father. He was the silent partner in my mother's schemes, but I knew he was also deeply unhappy. One evening, I cornered him in his study, not with anger, but with genuine, quiet sorrow. "Dad," I said, "I know you're trying to keep the peace, but Mom is going to ruin Michael's and my life to protect Clara from marrying her ex-husband's rival. She thinks I don't know about Mr. X." My father's shoulders slumped. He looked old and defeated. "She told me this was temporary, Sarah. Just a few months until the Robert situation died down. She swore she'd make it right. I held out the closing documents for our house. She's trying to put herself on the deed, Dad. This isn't temporary. This is a complete takeover. I need to protect myself. Did you know Clara and Mr. X are planning to announce their engagement at the upcoming Winter Gala? The Winter Gala, the biggest social event of the year, attended by all the major figures my mother was desperately trying to impress. My father's eyes went wide. That was their deadline. That was the moment my mother was trying to preempt with my forced sacrifice. In a rare moment of clarity, my father did the right thing. He gave me the one thing I desperately needed, the date and time of Clara's secret engagement party, which was happening 2 days before the gala, supposedly to a select group of friends. I now had the location, the timing, and the motive. The plan was no longer about defending myself. It was about orchestrating a shocking, public revelation that would save my future and destroy their deceptive narrative entirely. The secret engagement party was my target. It was a private event, meaning the people attending were the very individuals my mother needed to keep out of the loop concerning Clara's scandalous new romance. It was the perfect, contained environment to unleash the truth. Michael and I spent the next 48 hours preparing. We created a concise, elegant, and devastating document. It wasn't a rant, it was a timeline. It detailed the filing of Clara's divorce from Robert, the purchase date of the custom engagement ring for Mr. X proving premeditation, the specific legal actions my mother took to try and commandeer my future home, the direct quotes from my mother's New Year's dinner demand, showing her motive, sacrificing me to save Clara's image. This document was the irrefutable evidence. My next step was securing the location. The party was being held at a high-end, exclusive art gallery. Since I was officially an uninvited guest, Michael used a discreet connection to book a small, adjacent private room at the gallery under a pseudonym, citing a last-minute business meeting. The room had a direct view of the main floor, the perfect vantage point. The night of the party arrived. I felt an icy calm I hadn't known I possessed. I wore a dress that made me look confident and utterly untouchable. I was no longer the quiet, sensible daughter. I was the architect of my own justice. My mother and Clara were, predictably, at the center of the crowd, looking relieved and smug. They believed they had successfully deflected all attention from Clara's actual new relationship, basking in the pity they had engineered. They thought their wicked plot was working perfectly. Michael and I arrived at the gallery, slipping into our private, reserved room. The music was loud, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and deceit. I watched as Clara raised a glass, ready to announce her new engagement to the handful of people she cared to tell privately. Before the Winter Gala, I whispered to Michael, I need to hit them before the big announcement, where they feel safest. I took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. If I failed, I would lose everything. But if I succeeded, I would save my future, expose a terrible betrayal, and achieve a justice that was clean, sharp, and undeniable. I pulled out my phone, ready to execute the final stage of the plan. It was time for the quiet sister to make the loudest statement of her life. The music pulsed in the art gallery, a deceptive cover for the tension building inside me. I watched my sister Clara raise her glass, a picture of false innocence, ready to announce her future with Mr. X, the man who was actively dismantling the legacy of her past husband. My mother, Eleanor, was beaming with nervous relief, believing her carefully constructed wall of deceit was holding strong. They had no idea that their wall was about to be obliterated by a single digital blast. Michael stood beside me in the dim light of the private room, his hand resting on my shoulder. Ready? He murmured. Ready, I confirmed. This wasn't about being petty. This was about self-preservation. This was the moment of justice. I opened my email. I had compiled the devastating timeline into a clean, professional PDF, easy to read, impossible to deny. The subject line was chillingly simple. the true cost of family honor, why Sarah's future was sacrificed. I hit send. The recipients weren't just the party guests. I had obtained the contact list of the entire local social committee, the women my mother sought approval from, the powerful men whose opinions decided my family's social standing. Every single person in that gallery, and 50 more who were about to attend the winter gala, received the document instantly. For a full minute, nothing happened. Clara was still talking, her voice a little too loud, describing how she had found happiness after a tragic ordeal. The hypocrisy tasted like ash in my mouth. Then, the first ripple of silence hit. A woman near the canapes looked down at her phone, her eyes widening. She subtly nudged the man next to her. Within seconds, the ripple became a wave. The sound of clinking glasses and chatter was replaced by the low, dangerous flickering sound of dozens of screens being lit up. The energy in the room shifted instantly. People weren't looking at Clara. They were looking at their phones, their expressions moving rapidly from confusion to shock, and finally to utter disbelief. They were reading the truth, the calculated deception, the illegal attempt to seize my property, and the real reason for Clara's quick rebound, her choice to marry her ex-husband's rival for revenge and status, while using me as a human shield. My mother, Eleanor, was the last to realize the devastation. She was too busy basking in the approval she thought she was generating. She noticed the sudden deep silence first, then the horrified, averted gazes of her friends. She looked down at her own phone, her face already turning gray. As she scrolled through the PDF, seeing the cold numbered list of her own actions, seeing the copies of the deed transfer papers she thought were private, seeing the jeweler's receipt that exposed Clara's deception, her composure shattered. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice a raw, desperate gasp, "what have you done?" Clara, too, was reading the document, her triumphant smile dissolving into a mask of pure terror. She realized that not only was her secret exposed, but the full, humiliating mechanism of the cover-up was now public knowledge among the very people they cared about. Mr. X, the fiancé, looked confused and slightly uncomfortable. He hadn't been betrayed, he was part of the secret, but he was now seeing the depth of the family drama he had married into. My mother tried to seize control. She raised her voice, trying to inject her familiar authority into the room. "This is slander. This is a jealous lie. This is the instability I spoke of." But it was too late. The facts, presented so neatly and cleanly, spoke for themselves. The guests weren't looking at me with judgment. They were looking at my mother with icy skepticism. They knew Eleanor. They knew her obsession with appearances. The document simply confirmed the depth of her manipulative nature. I stepped out of the private room and walked slowly, deliberately, toward my mother and sister. The crowd parted around me, leaving a wide, silent path. Every eye in that gallery was fixed on me. I had their full, undivided attention. I stopped directly in front of my mother and sister. I felt no fear, only a cold, powerful sense of justice. They had tried to steal my future. Now I was taking back my narrative. My mother took a stumbling step toward me, her hand outstretched. "You will delete this, Sarah. Now. You will apologize to everyone here, and you will fix this immediately." Her voice was trembling, stripped of its power. This was her last desperate gasp for control, and I shut her down instantly. "There is nothing to fix, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm enough to carry through the silence. "The truth is not a mistake to be fixed. It is a reality to be faced." I turned my attention briefly to the guests, the members of the community who had judged Clara, and were now judging my mother. My mother and sister attempted to steal my home and force the indefinite postponement of my wedding, I stated, keeping my tone perfectly even. They did this not because Clara was heartbroken, but because they needed a distraction. They needed to cover up the fact that Clara was marrying her ex-husband's fiercest rival, a move they knew would destroy the family's carefully crafted image. I held their gaze. When I refused to sacrifice my life, they called me selfish. They tried to legally force my hand. I am here tonight not to cause a scene, but to reclaim my truth and my future. I looked back at my mother, who was utterly left speechless, her face pale with defeat. You wanted to save Clara's honor, Mom? I asked, a sliver of genuine heartbreak in my voice. You didn't. You destroyed mine instead. And in doing so, you exposed the real shame that lies at the heart of our family, the willingness to betray one child for the perceived benefit of another. Clara began to cry, not tears of remorse, but of pure, self-pitying rage. You're ruining me. You're just jealous. I didn't even look at her. I spoke only to my mother, ending the confrontation on a note of absolute finality. The wedding is not postponed, I announced clearly, loud enough for the gallery to hear. It will happen exactly as planned in 3 months. Michael and I will be closing on our house tomorrow without any co-signers. And your involvement in my life, Mom, is indefinitely on hold. With that, Michael put his arm around me. We didn't need to say another word. We turned our backs on the wreckage we had created, a wreckage that was entirely the consequence of their own wicked plot, and walked out, leaving the stunned silence and the destroyed narrative behind us. The betrayal was answered. Justice was served. Walking out of that gallery felt like stepping out of a suffocating suit of armor I hadn't realized I was wearing my entire life. The air outside was cold, but I felt nothing but warmth and relief. We didn't look back, we didn't need to. The silence behind us was louder than any scream. We had dropped a truth bomb, and the explosion was still echoing in the room we left. The next few days were characterized by chilling silence, the kind of silence that precedes a permanent break. My mother, Eleanor, didn't call, text, or show up at my apartment. My father, in his typical avoidance, sent a single, simple text message. The house papers are clear. I stopped the co-signing. I'm sorry, Sarah. His apology was too little too late, but it was confirmation that my plan had worked. My future was secured. Clara, predictably, went on the offensive, but only through social media, where she posted vague, dramatic lamentations about being unfairly judged and the cruelty of jealous siblings. But her audience had already read the receipts. They had seen the timeline. Her performance landed flat, eliciting polite, distant silence rather than the sympathy she craved. She was fighting a war of opinion that I had already won with hard facts. The real fallout was felt in my mother's world. The local social column, usually a gushing source of praise for the family, ran a cryptic but poignant piece about a New Year's betrayal and family feuds that end in public ruin. The article didn't name names, but it described a mother sacrificing one daughter's security to cover up the scandal of another. In their small, insular world, the message was loud and clear. My mother's reputation, her most prized possession, was destroyed. She had spent a lifetime building an image of the perfect matriarch, the elegant woman who orchestrated flawless lives. And in one night, I had exposed her as a manipulative schemer, a cruel mother, and a social liability. Michael and I didn't waste a minute. The day after the confrontation, we went to the bank and finalized the mortgage. The following day, we signed the closing papers for our house. It was one of the most emotional moments of my life. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. It was a tangible monument to the fact that I had fought for my life and won. Standing in the empty living room, with the official keys in my hand, I finally felt the weight lift. Michael looked at me, not with pity or concern, but with profound respect. We did it, Sarah, he said quietly. You didn't just save our house. You saved us from that toxic dynamic forever. I realized then that the biggest loss wouldn't have been the money or the delay. It would have been letting my mother believe she had the right to dictate my happiness. By accepting her demands, I would have surrendered my autonomy. By fighting back, I had claimed it completely. But the finality of the decision was hard. Family, even a toxic one, leaves a hole. I knew I had to draw an absolute permanent line. My mother tried one final desperate maneuver. She sent a lengthy email, not apologizing for the betrayal, but apologizing for how she handled it. She tried to frame her actions as a trivial, misguided effort to protect the family name and suggested we meet for lunch to move past this. Her email confirmed everything. She still didn't see me as a person she had deeply wounded. She saw me as a strategic problem to be managed. My response was brief, clean, and irreversible. I thanked her for securing the house papers, confirmed the wedding was going ahead, and told her that until she understood the difference between a sacrifice made with love and a demand made with control, there could be no relationship between us. I asked her not to contact me or Michael, and I pressed send. That was the official definitive end. The end of the forced deference, the end of the silent compliance, and the start of a life lived entirely on my own terms. Over the next few months, life took on a new, incredible quietness. There were no more unexpected demands, no more passive-aggressive texts, no more mandatory, suffocating dinners. The silence was the greatest gift I could have received. Clara and Mr. X went ahead with a quiet scaled-down wedding after the disastrous exposure at the gallery. The grand society wedding they had planned was shut down by the collective social embarrassment. They were still married, but their union began not with celebration, but with a deep, public shadow. The very honor my mother had tried to protect was precisely what she had lost. As for my mother, she became a diminished presence in her own world. Her friends, the arbiters of her worth, treated her with a cold politeness. She was no longer seen as the powerful matriarch, but as the woman who had brutally betrayed her own daughter for the sake of appearances. She had won the battle to save Clara from scandal, but she had lost the entire war for her own social standing. Her control over the narrative was utterly destroyed. Our own wedding day, 3 months later, was simple, joyful, and completely free of my family's presence. Every smile, every toast, every dance felt authentic and earned. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a celebration of freedom. The greatest irony was that my life, the one my mother had dismissed as secondary and disposable, had become everything she wanted for herself. Secure, genuinely happy, and completely respectable. I had always been the one who was quiet, the one who tried to keep the peace. But I learned a powerful lesson. Sometimes, the greatest act of peace is to start a war for yourself. The cost of protecting my sister's honor had been set as my entire future. But I refused to pay that price. Instead, I demanded a new currency, the shocking, undeniable truth. And I paid them back in full. The revenge was swift, clean, and entirely successful. But success doesn't always equal immediate healing. In the months after I drew that final, irreversible line, I was forced to deal with the vast, aching emptiness where my family used to be. The silence was precious, yes, but sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, it felt like an echo of loss. I realized that the hardest part of the betrayal wasn't the material loss they attempted, the house, the wedding, but the loss of the idea of a loving mother and sister. I grieved the relationship I thought I had, the one built on unconditional support. It was a phantom limb, a pain for something that was never truly there. Therapy helped me understand that Eleanor's actions were never about me being inadequate. They were about her deep, crippling insecurity regarding social standing. To her, image was currency, and Clara's divorce had caused a deficit she was desperate to correct, even if the correction required bankrupting my life. I kept coming back to the chilling moment at the New Year's dinner. The look in my mother's eyes wasn't malice. It was entitlement. It was the absolute conviction that, as my mother, she had the right to redeploy my assets, my happiness, and my entire future, simply because she perceived a greater need elsewhere. That moment was the clearest expression of true, devastating betrayal. The failure of trust from the very source where trust is supposed to be absolute. I had to consciously rewire my understanding of family. I learned that family isn't just about biology. It's about the people who treat you with honor and respect. Michael and his parents, who supported me fiercely through the chaos, became my true family. They were the ones who truly helped me heal the emotional wounds left by my own blood. Years later, I received small, fragmented reports about Clara's life. Clara and Mr. X's marriage started under the cloud of the public reveal and never seemed to find genuine sunlight. It was a union built on strategy and spite against her ex-husband Robert, not genuine affection. The very thing my mother had tried to protect, Clara's perceived honor, was the first thing she sacrificed. Clara married into power, but not into happiness. She became a prisoner of the image my mother had always groomed her for, perpetually perfect, perpetually stressed, and perpetually unforgiving. The irony was painful. My mother's obsession with controlling the narrative ultimately resulted in the narrative controlling both of their lives. They had sacrificed genuine human connection for social standing, and they ended up with neither. I, the one who was supposed to be the family's failure or the convenient sacrifice, was the one who found genuine peace. I had a loving home, a stable marriage, and a career I enjoyed. I had traded the gilded cage of my mother's approval for the wide-open sky of my own self-respect. The most profound realization was that my mother's desire wasn't to see her children happy. It was to see them controlled. And the moment I refused that control, I became the winner, regardless of the cost to our relationship. For anyone who has faced a betrayal like this, the moral lesson isn't just about revenge. It's about self-preservation. The first thing you must do is recognize the pattern. My mother and sister weren't acting out of a one-time crisis. They were acting out of a deep-seated toxic entitlement that had existed for years. My act of justice at the gallery was simply the last necessary boundary I could draw. The second lesson: your future is not a bargaining chip. The moment someone demands you sacrifice your fundamental happiness, security, or self-respect for their convenience, you must walk away or, better yet, fight back. My mother had banked on my silence, my fear of conflict, and my lifetime of training as the quiet, accommodating daughter. But I proved that the quietest person can hold the most powerful truth. And when that truth is exposed, it can dismantle even the most entrenched deceit. Today, years later, the distance remains. There is no reconciliation, and that is okay. I chose peace over obligation, truth over image. I learned that the greatest act of love you can show yourself is the courage to save your own life, even if it means watching someone else's false world shut down. I never regretted exposing the plot. I regretted that the plot existed in the first place. But I used their wicked act to forge a future that was truly undeniably mine. And that, ultimately, was the most satisfying form of justice I could ever achieve. For anyone who has faced a betrayal like this, the moral lesson isn't just about revenge. It's about self-preservation. The first thing you must do is recognize the pattern. My mother and sister weren't acting out of a one-time crisis. They were acting out of a deep-seated toxic entitlement that had existed for years. My act of justice at the gallery was simply the last necessary boundary I could draw. The second lesson: your future is not a bargaining chip. The moment someone demands you sacrifice your fundamental happiness, security, or self-respect for their convenience, you must walk away or, better yet, fight back. My mother had banked on my silence, my fear of conflict, and my lifetime of training as the quiet, accommodating daughter. But I proved that the quietest person can hold the most powerful truth. And when that truth is exposed, it can dismantle even the most entrenched deceit. Today, years later, the distance remains. There is no reconciliation, and that is okay. I chose peace over obligation, truth over image. I learned that the greatest act of love you can show yourself is the courage to save your own life, even if it means watching someone else's false world shut down. I never regretted exposing the plot. I regretted that the plot existed in the first place. But I used their wicked act to forge a future that was truly undeniably mine. And that, ultimately, was the most satisfying form of justice I could ever achieve. The story of my family's betrayal wasn't unique to us. It was a microcosm of a much larger, more dangerous societal trap, the obsession with image over reality. My mother, Eleanor, wasn't fighting for her children. She was fighting for the perception of perfection. That facade required constant, energy-draining maintenance, and when Clara's divorce cracked the surface, the solution wasn't healing the crack, it was simply patching it with a stolen piece of my life. I realized that people who are pathologically obsessed with outward appearances often view those closest to them, especially their children, not as complex individuals, but as supporting characters in their own carefully curated production. We were merely props in her stage play of the perfect family. When a prop failed like Clara's marriage, the cost of replacing it was always externalized. In this case, the cost was me. That's why the exposure was so devastating to my mother. It wasn't just the facts I revealed. It was the total dismantling of her carefully constructed self. I didn't just expose her plot. I exposed the emptiness of the facade she had spent her life defending. When the public, her jury, saw the lengths she would go to maintain that illusion, they didn't see strength. They saw desperation and moral bankruptcy. The most potent form of revenge is simply to choose authenticity in the face of their artifice. I chose my real, flawed, but honest life with Michael over the spotless manufactured future my mother demanded. And in doing so, I became richer in genuine happiness than she could ever be in societal acceptance. The emotional fallout of cutting off your own mother and sister is immense. But the answer is yes, it gets profoundly easier because the pain of separation is finite, while the pain of constant betrayal and abuse is infinite. The moment I sent that final firm email, I established a boundary line so thick and strong, nothing toxic could cross it. Boundaries, I learned, are not about punishing others. They are about protecting yourself. They are a statement that your mental and emotional health is non-negotiable. I used to spend countless hours anticipating my mother's moods, interpreting Clara's snubs, and preparing defensive strategies for family gatherings. That energy is now redirected entirely into my life, my marriage, and my career. It's the incredible, expansive feeling of freedom that comes from knowing the battlefield is closed, the war is won, and you are finally irrevocably safe. The emotional triggers that used to send me spiraling, the expectation of perfection, the fear of disappointing Eleanor, have been shut down. They have no power over me because they have no access to me. That silence is the true prize of my fight. It is the peace I paid for with the courage to confront the very people I was supposed to trust. My mother, Eleanor, never truly recovered from the public judgment. It wasn't the material loss. She still had wealth. It was the loss of status. She was left with the constant, crushing reality that her own daughter had exposed her deepest flaws to the world she valued most. I never wished ill upon her. I simply demanded justice for myself. But the consequence of her action trying to steal my future was that she lost her own peace. She continued to live in her beautiful large house, but the house became a lonely, silent monument to her failed attempt at control. She never contacted me to sincerely apologize. Not once did she acknowledge that my future was my own to determine. That lack of true introspection is, perhaps, the most tragic consequence of all. She could have had a daughter, a son-in-law, and a place at the wedding. Instead, she chose a destructive image. My revenge was not cruel, it was necessary. It was a direct consequence of a deeply cruel act. She tried to extinguish my light to shine on her favorite. But my refusal to be extinguished ultimately broke her carefully constructed world. And the enduring lesson is this: never let anyone, especially family, define your worth or dictate your destiny. Because sometimes, the people who are supposed to hold you up are the very ones trying to tear you down. And when they do, you must find the inner strength to expose their plot and build your future elsewhere. Time, the great rectifier, passed. The wound of betrayal eventually scarred over, leaving behind not constant pain, but a deep, protective wisdom. It was the daily quiet choice to live a life so beautiful and authentic that their absence became a feature, not a flaw. Michael and I built our lives in that house, the house they tried to steal, it became more than just a home. It was a physical manifestation of our strength and defiance. Every happy memory forged within those walls was a silent victory over the attempted deceit. As for Clara and her husband, the strategic marriage didn't last. A union founded on ambition and resentment, rather than genuine connection, inevitably crumbles. The pressure of maintaining the facade, combined with the lingering social whispers from the gallery night, proved too much. Their divorce, when it finally came, was quiet, humiliating, and confirmed the unstable foundation I had always suspected. She was left exactly where she started, but this time, without the energy or the support system to engineer another grand rescue. The cycle of deceit finally shut down. And my mother, Eleanor, was left with the ultimate, hollow victory. She won the war of keeping Clara connected to a certain level of status, but she lost the two things she needed most: control and connection. Her obsession with the optics left her with nothing but a perfect empty image. She was surrounded by wealth, yet she was utterly impoverished in genuine human warmth. I heard she eventually tried to reach out, but her attempts were always phrased as demands for access, never as sincere pleas for forgiveness. I kept the line drawn. The true victory in this whole dark chapter was not securing the house or having the wedding. My mother tried to teach me that my value was conditional on my compliance, my silence, and my willingness to serve her version of family honor. My response taught me, and hopefully taught anyone who witnessed this story, that your value is inherent. It is built not on what you sacrifice for others, but on the courage you have to stand up for yourself. Before that moment, I was a quiet daughter, living a life that fit within the expectations of others. After that moment, I became the architect of my own destiny. The pain of the betrayal was the currency I paid for my permanent freedom. I didn't just survive the attempt to steal my future. I claimed it, polished it, and built it into something far stronger than my mother could have ever designed. I became fiercely protective of my peace, utterly unapologetic about my boundaries, and deeply grateful for the honest, genuine love I found with Michael. The final lesson I carry forward is simple but profound. Your courage must be louder than their entitlement. When you are faced with a choice to be obediently destroyed by a toxic dynamic, or to bravely break it and save yourself, always choose salvation. Don't be afraid to expose the secrets, to shine a light on the manipulation, and to show the world the shocking truth about those who hide behind facades. Because the only way to truly defeat betrayal is not with an equal act of malice, but with a greater, more undeniable act of justice and self-love. I didn't seek revenge, I sought balance. I simply forced them to pay the price for their deceit, not with my life, but with their own carefully constructed lies. And the justice was absolute. It started at a dinner table, with a cold demand disguised as a family requirement. My mother looked at me and asked me to hand over my future, my home, and my happiness, all to protect a lie, to save her image, to save my sister's fragile honor. They expected the quiet daughter to comply. They expected me to sacrifice my security for their convenience. They thought my silence was guaranteed. But betrayal is a fire. It can either consume you, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. I chose to fight back with the only weapon that truly destroys hypocrisy, the undeniable truth. I exposed their plot, saved my life, and forced them to live in the reality they had desperately tried to avoid. If you take only one thing away from this story, let it be this. The price of allowing others to control your life is always higher than the cost of fighting for your freedom. My sister's honor was not saved. My mother's image was shattered. But my future? My future was built on the foundation of courage, and it is entirely wonderfully mine. Always remember, you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And sometimes, the most profound revenge is simply to choose to be happy. Thank you for watching. The final lesson I carry forward is simple but profound. Your courage must be louder than their entitlement. When you're faced with a choice to be obediently destroyed by a toxic dynamic, or to bravely break it and save yourself, always choose salvation. Don't be afraid to expose the secrets, to shine a light on the manipulation, and to show the world the shocking truth about those who hide behind facades. Because the only way to truly defeat betrayal is not with an equal act of malice, but with a greater, more undeniable act of justice and self-love. I didn't seek revenge, I sought balance. I simply forced them to pay the price for their deceit, not with my life, but with their own carefully constructed lies. And the justice was absolute. It started at a dinner table, with a cold demand disguised as a family requirement. My mother looked at me and asked me to hand over my future, my home, and my happiness all to protect a lie, to save her image, to save my sister's fragile honor. They expected the quiet daughter to comply. They expected me to sacrifice my security for their convenience. They thought my silence was guaranteed. But betrayal is a fire. It can either consume you, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. I chose to fight back with the only weapon that truly destroys hypocrisy, the undeniable truth. I exposed their plot, saved my life, and forced them to live in the reality they had desperately tried to avoid. If you take only one thing away from this story, let it be this. The price of allowing others to control your life is always higher than the cost of fighting for your freedom. My sister's honor was not saved, my mother's image was shattered. But my future? My future was built on the foundation of courage, and it is entirely wonderfully mine. Always remember, you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And sometimes, the most profound revenge is simply to choose to be happy. Thank you for watching.